Welcome, this is Casual Dumpling and this is my Frenzy Barbarian Latryna. This will be my updated Frenzied Double Swing build for patch 1.1.1. Blizzard did increase the mob density in Nightmare Dungeons in the recent patch, and they also included a lot of other changes, so I had to make some adjustments to the build. But surprisingly, it's doing very, very good, and it's a bit stronger than it used to be, quite a bit stronger. And even though, as you will see in the background, in the footage in the background, at the moment I'm still not using Barber. I'm level 86 and I have not used Barber once. I'm planning to do that once I get stuck in Nightmare Dungeons, but at the moment I'm at climbing on a daily basis. And once I get stuck, probably around level 60 or something like that, then I'll switch to Barber. The guide will not be short, but I will try to give you as much information as possible, everything I learned about the build, about the mechanics, so you can, use that knowledge to your own advantage. So yeah, don't get discouraged by the video length, and I put the annotations, put the chapters in the description, so if you're interested only in a certain part of the build, you don't have to, sit through everything and listen to me ramble about stuff which is not interesting to you. So just jump to the part which you're most interested in. Probably. Why you should play this build? Why is it strong? First of all, you will have good, reliable source of applying vulnerable debuff to your enemy. You'll have constant berserking buff running in the background. You'll be able to comfortably apply bleeds to your enemies. You'll have strong single target and area of effect damage, so strong AoE. You'll have very strong crowd control options and a way to move your enemies around. You'll also have multiple layers of defense and challenging shout to help you survive those nasty situations and to be able to ignore certain mechanics. And so yeah, if you like builds that do not require a lot of attention, builds which have a nice rhythm and cadence to them, and builds which are basically right in the face of your enemies, then this build is hopefully for you. So maybe let's start with the talent tree and go from the top. We want 5 points into Frenzy to deal. We want to make it as useful as possible. And we go to the Combat Frenzy to get the damage reduction. Frenzy with this Combat Frenzy node and along with the legendary aspect which provides damage reduction from basic attacks will be a big source of our survivability and will help us stay alive in the dungeons or in the open world or whatever you're doing. I have 9 points here, as you can see, mostly because I'm using, well, only because I'm using Battle Trance Amulet, which gives you additional points into Frenzy, and also it gives you 2 more stacks, so you can stack your attack speed and also damage reduction even higher. Let's move to Double Swing. I put all 5 points here. Enhanced double Swing, which is very good. When you hit stun or knock down enemy, you regain Fury, and you're going to be stunning and knocking down enemies all the time, so you can basically spam Double Swing if you wish. And also Violent Double Swing to make sure that we have permanent vulnerable debuff on our enemies. Next, we take 1 point to Ground Stomp to be able to stun our enemies. We also increase the duration, and we also get a talent which allows us to generate Fury when you cast Ground Stomp. So thanks to this, when you have no Fury, you can just cast Ground Stomp and start spamming your Double Swings. So that is very nice. 1 point to Imposing Presence. You can put more if you have trouble with staying alive. And also I put 3 points to Marital Vigor. Damage reduction against elite enemies is very important. So yeah, 3 points here. This is also maybe worth mentioning. This is one shout build that's deliberate. I didn't want to put more than one shout, so I decided to go with challenging shout because it allows you to stay alive. It allows you to stand in all sorts of nasty area of effects on the ground. So you can ignore most of them and you don't have to worry about them. And I also put 1 point into Enhanced Challenging Shout to give you more health. If you want, you can do it without Challenging Shout. You can go with 0 Shout build, and it's still viable. You just replace Challenging Shout with Iron Skin. And then you have to use the legendary aspect for Iron Skin on your gear, which will give you unstoppable and damage reduction. So whichever you prefer, Iron Skin is probably better, but for some reason I don't like that skill, but I find Challenging Shout cool, so that's why I'm using it. If you do not have a source of bleed in your build, then you can put 1 point here and 1 point into Toughness Nails, so the enemies will start bleeding when they hit you. But you do have a very easy access to bleed in this build, so I'm not putting those points here at the moment. No points to brawling skills. Next, let's move to the weapon mastery skills. 3 points into Pit Fighter, which will give us much needed damage reduction against distant enemies and increase damage against close enemies. So basically all of the enemies we are fighting. And very important, 3 points into No Mercy, which will give us increased critical strike chance against immobilized, stunned, or slowed enemies. So basically, most of the enemies we fight will be either will be stunned or knocked down. So, and if you have the boots, don't remember how they are called, but there's a pair of unique boots, which provides a slow aura around your character, and so this would also be able to activate the No Mercy debuff. So if you want to use those boots, go ahead. I'm not using them because they do not provide dodge charges, but if you do not mind that, go ahead and include that in your build. 1 point into Steel Grasp, which I had to take now after Blizzard introduced the changes to mob density in Nightmare dungeons. So after doing like, I don't know, maybe 20-30 dungeons, I believe that Steel Grasp is basically mandatory nowadays, because in certain dungeons, when the mobs are spread out, especially ghosts, it's very, very annoying to fight those enemies. So if you want to preserve your sanity, you're basically required to use Steel Grasp nowadays, so that's why I have a point here. Only one, because we don't really need more. The damage increase from levels is marginal, so don't worry about that. It would lower our cooldown, which is nice, but I'm not really worried about that much. Enhanced Steel Grasp gives us vulnerable when we use our chains. Superb ability, very, very good. And also I decided to go with Warrior Steel Grasp to give me additional charge, and that's why I do not have to worry about charges. I'm basically all the time have the charges in my build. So yeah. So I have 2 points into Thick Skin. One is definitely enough because you just want to put that point in here to activate the other nose, but I had 1 point left, so I didn't know where to put it, so I just randomly put it here. It's probably a better place to put it, but didn't want to think too much. Very important is counteroffensive. Whenever we have Fortify, we'll deal 12% increased damage, which is a multiplier, which is very, very good. You want as much multipliers as possible in order to increase your damage, and we all have Fortify basically all the time at 100%, so that's a free multiplier for you there. We also have Defensive Stance to further increase the damage reduction we get from Fortify. I also put 5 points into Death Blow, which is very nice in this build. It allows you to detonate a lot of weak enemies, and this is what allows us to get basically permanent berserking buff running in the background. Enhanced Death Blow to deal more damage to bosses, and Warrior's Death Blow. This will give us the berserking. As for ultimate skills, I used to run Call of the Ancients and Iron Maelstrom and even Wrath of the Berserker. But now, due to the changes to monster density, I opted to go for Steel Grasp. And so no points into any of the ultimate skills. I put 3 points into Duelist to increase the speed of my Frenzy and my Double Swing. I'm going with Unconstrained to increase damage which we get from Berserking and also increase the duration. This pairs really well with the Warrior's Death Blow. Another thing you can do is to use the Walking Arsenal passive. You will not be able to get all 3 of the nodes active to get the maximum benefit of Walking Arsenal, but you will be able to get 2 nodes, one from Frenzy and Double Swing and the other one from Death Blow. Things which you could change in the skill tree, which could benefit you. If you do not want to use Death Blow for Berserking, you can take 1 point out of Warrior Steel Grasp and put it into Fighter Steel Grasp. But the Berserking, which you'll get from here, combined with Unconstrained, is much shorter than you will get from Death Blow with Unconstrained. Even though it may seem marginal, there's like a 1 second difference. Here's 2 seconds and here's 3. Actually, for some reason, the Steel Grasp doesn't seem to be getting the full benefit in terms of duration when it comes to Berserking. Other things which you can do is you could also try to get the Invigorating Fury passive. We are burning a lot of Fury because we used Double Swing a lot, so this will provide a substantial amount of healing to your character. Another thing which you can do if you do not want to use Death Blow that much, you could go for Steel Grasp, put those points into Steel Grasp below its cooldown. You will get vulnerable from the Steel Grasp, and you would get Berserking from Steel Grasp, so your job would be to use Steel Grasp quite often, not only to group enemies, but also to debuff them with vulnerable and also to buff yourself with Berserking. And then you could move that point from the Violent Double Swing, because you would no longer need the vulnerable debuff, and you could put it into Furious Double Swing, which would actually increase the duration of your Berserking. So that's your choice. That's up to you. I personally really like Death Blow as a skill. It feels really good to use, and it allows you to detonate a lot of weak enemies at the start of the fight. So I prefer it this way, but you can definitely switch those points around. I think that is all in terms of a skill tree. Okay, so let's move to the next section, and this section will be Paragon Board. Maybe first I'll show you which glyph I'm using, and then we'll go through the Paragon Board. The first one which you definitely should level is Exploit, because vulnerable debuffing is extremely important, very strong multiplier. So definitely try to get this as high as possible and try to activate the additional bonus, which will allow you to basically get a free vulnerable damage at the start of the fight. Next, very important, is Wrath. You will get increased critical strike damage. Again, very strong damage multiplier. Try to get as high crit chance as possible and as much critical damage as you can have. Bonus is also good because it will allow us to basically stay at 100 Fury most of the time. So yeah, I take that into consideration. That's also very important. I like using Ambidextrous because it's an easy access to 80% damage multiplier, which will work on our Frenzy and Double Swing. It also buffs magic nodes within the vicinity of the node. So for example, here you can see that I have additional vulnerable damage and damage reduction, and also additional dexterity in to willpower coming from all of those nodes around here. Instead of giving me like I believe 7 points, they are giving me 14 points right now. So, and the last one which I would recommend you level at the beginning is the Undaunted. It gives you increased damage when you are fortified. This is not such a strong multiplier compared to the other ones previously mentioned, but when you fully level it up, it will give you up to 10% damage reduction when you are fortified. So we are fortified basically all the time, so it's an easy access to additional damage reduction. So that's why I'm using it. As for the other nodes, which you can use, as for the other glyphs, I mean, Mortal Drow is quite good. I'll most likely use it on my next Paragon board. This very heavily increases the damage when you swap to a new weapon, so that would increase the damage, because basically most of the time we're using Frenzy and Double Swing, but occasionally we also use Death Blow, so that would allow us to just explode enemies and heavily increase the damage coming from Death Blow. And then when we would go back after casting Death Blow to Double Swing, it would also increase the damage of a Double Swing. So what you can do after you pull your enemies in, you use once Frenzy just to make sure that you have the correct weapon selected, and then you would use your Death Blow to detonate and explode low health enemies, and to give yourself berserking, and to use that mortal draw debuff. And then you cast Double Swing, so you would again get the full benefit of the mortal draw debuff, which is very strong. Additionally, you could use Territorial, which would increase your damage and also give you damage reduction against closed enemies. Blood Feeder is also very strong. Our enemies will be bleeding almost all the time, so you would get free 5% critical strike chance against them, and also increase critical strike damage. So if you're looking for a pure damage increasing glyph, this one is, I would recommend it a lot. It's very good. Here we have Marshal, which many people use in their builds, but this is one-shot build, potentially zero-shot build, so this is not really that useful to us. Lastly, as I mentioned before, Revenge can also be quite good because it can buff the rare nodes in the vicinity, and also the bonus seems like a nice thing to have. So whenever Taunts deals damage to enemies, and you can have access to taunts from gear and from skill tree, you would get a percentage damage multiplier against them. However, in this build I do not think it's really working that well, because most of our enemies will either be knocked down or stunned, so they will not have a lot of opportunities to actually hit us and to activate Thorns, so I would not recommend that. Taking that glyph, I mean. Now that we have glyphs out of the way, let's talk about the Paragon Board. The start is really up to you. Tenacity or Brown, it's a cosmetic choice. If you want some more armor and health, go for Tenacity. If you do not really have that much trouble staying alive, you can get Brown to boost your damage a bit. But that's really up to you whether you go left or right. Next, we move to get the Iron Strength. This will give you a nice boost to your armor. And then we leave here to get the neck. We go north to leave to get to the next Paragon Board. In this example, I'm using Glyph, which requires a lot of dexterity nodes, so that's why I try to grab as many dexterity nodes. And while I was already here, I grabbed Raw Power to get some more physical damage. In my case, I have Wrath over here, so yeah, increase damage to my critical strike damage. Next board which I chose is the one with the Flawless Technique, which will increase our critical strike chance, which is very nice. And first of all, I start by going to get the Havoc. Here we have critical strike damage nodes, which are extremely good. Then we'll move to Heavy Blows, again critical strike damage nodes, very very good. And then I'm going for Bash to get some damage reduction against close enemies. How you fill the board in the middle is really up to you, depending on the glyphs which you decide to use. I'm using the glyph with Fortifier, which is, I think, the Undaunted. And I decided to use it here because there are a lot of willpower nodes around here. I think there are 10 willpower nodes in the vicinity, so that's why I decided to put it here. So yeah, I think this is the most. I think this is the best start for the Frenzy Double Swing, because you get a lot of critical strike damage in this node, and the Flawless Technique is very good for our build. Then I move to the north to exit the board. I have to go through Slayer, which is, most of those healing nodes are not really that good. To be honest, they are quite bad, but at least in Slayer we have some armor. But I'm using it mostly to get to the Flawless Technique and the Wild Force. This will give us around 4% increase attack speed from those 3 nodes, so that's why I go here. If you do not want to, if you are not interested in the Wild Force, you can very well omit the Slayer and the Wild Force and go maybe through the bottom to get the Flawless Technique, and this way you will save some points. The next board is the board with the Decimator, which is also very, very good, and I recommend you take it. And at the very beginning, we are grabbing the vulnerable damage nodes. So this is a substantial amount of vulnerable damage. We are getting 35% from here. And we also get an additional vulnerable damage from here. So another 35%, if I'm not mistaken. Clear 35%. I have a bit more because I'm using a glyph here. We also go for arrogance to reduce the damage, to increase the damage reduction again we get against enemies under vulnerable debuff. So very good. And I decided to use the ambidextrous glyph here to increase the amount of vulnerable damage I can get from the rare nodes around me, and also because we have willpower and dexterity, and willpower for some reason is required in a lot of nodes for the barbarian, and I never have enough willpower, so if I can get more from here, that's beneficial for me. So I think those 2 Paragon boards are the best start you can get in the Frenzied Double Swing Barbarian. So yeah, that's why I decided to go here. I'm not getting the Decimator because it's mostly for 2-handed weapons, and we use 2-handed weapons only when we use Death Blow, and we don't use it as often, so so that's probably not worth it. Next, we go to the Paragon board with Carnage, and you can rotate the board. I decided to go through here and put it in a way where I can have access to increased berserking duration from those 3 nodes. But if you are not that lazy, I would rotate the board, and I would start from grabbing the berserker. You have damage against elite nodes here, which are very strong. So I will start by going here. We also will get the Fierce to get the berserking damage, and also the damage reduction from close enemies. And in here, my glyph is the exploit glyph. Let's now talk about my items. I'll show you my items and talk about what I'm looking for on my gear, and then I'll talk about the gems, and lastly about legendary aspects, which are very important. So first, let's start with the helm. On helm, you would like to have cooldown reduction, which is very good, and also health. Health, I believe, can roll on helm and pants, and I think on the armor. So if you can get more health on those, try to get them. That they can be rolled on those 3 pieces. They can also appear on your rings. So health is very good. Total armor is great. If this was a perfect helm, I would want to replace the healing receipt, which is not really that great, with additional levels to Death Blow. As for chest, I have some life, armor, and damage reduction. Basically, if you have life and any sort of damage reduction here, it's good. If you're using iron skin, you can get additional levels of iron skin on your chest. But preferably, you want like the damage reduction against either total damage reduction or armor or health. So this should be your defensive item slot. For gloves, I believe you should aim to get at least attack speed, critical strike chance, and additional ranks to your double swing. These 3, I believe, are mandatory. If you're gonna get lucky, you find or roll for lucky hit chance. That's also very good. But if you don't have lucky hit chance, don't worry about it. Attack speed, crit chance, and double swing levels are more important. For pants, you would preferably like to use pants with maximum life rolls and maybe total armor, damage reduction, or conditional damage reduction, like against bleeding enemies, close enemies, distant enemies, or this should be your defensive slot, but preferably with life. On your boots can be quite random, but the only thing which I consider to be mandatory on boots is movement speed and evade charges. Everything else is just like a bonus to you. In here I have a fortified generation, which is great. Damage reduction while I'm injured, which is also quite good, and additional berserking duration. So very good rolls and very good, actually, very nice pair of boots. It'd be quite hard for me to replace it. Unfortunately, it has low item level, but you know, what can you do? My amulet is Battle Trance. You can play this build without Battle Trance, but it will definitely make it better. They changed it in the recent patch, and in here it now rolls with cooldown reduction, which makes it even better. Damage reduction from close enemies and while injured are built into the amulet, so quite okay stats, not perfect, but okay. It can give you, in a Sacred version, up to 3 rank of Frenzy, and in the Ancestral version of the item, it can give you up to 4 levels of Frenzy, which is quite good. It will not only boost up your damage, but more importantly, it has additional effect which allows you to stack Frenzy 2 additional times, so this will give you more damage reduction and also attack speed. Which is very good, is the additional attack speed for your other abilities. So for example, for your death blows and your double swings, when you have fully stacked Frenzy, so if you are attacked with Frenzy for 5 times and it has maximum number of stacks, then your other abilities will get additional attack speed bonus. And that is exceptionally good. And I'm not really talking about increasing your damage per se, because that's nice. But before the patch, when the bonus was actually much lower, you would notice a significant delay when you would try to cast Double Swing after using Frenzy. It may not actually be factual. It may just, you know, seem like there's a delay in your head, but the cadence was definitely disturbed before the patch. Now, thanks to the buff to the Battle Trance amulet, when you are attacking with Frenzy and then when you cast your Double Swing, you do not see any delay. It's very fluid and it's extremely enjoyable to play now, and I'm very grateful for the change. It was I didn't know I needed that change, but it was a great and I'm very appreciative of it, and I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, so let's move now next to the rings. On the rings, critical hit chance, critical strike damage, and vulnerable damage are very, very important. So try to get a ring with at least 2 of those stats and roll for the 3rd one. As for the other stats, which you can get on your rings, lucky hit chance is nice. You can also get life here, which is also very good. So if you are able to get 4 out of those stats, that's a very good ring. Unfortunately, I wasn't really that lucky, so I do have rings with those stats, but they are still a very low item power level, so I wasn't able to find anything good. And the sockets in the rings are also not that great, so I would love to have a blue socket here or on the other ring, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find one. On my other ring I have also vulnerable damage, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage. I also have damage to close enemies. I would want to re-roll that into a lucky hit chance or life, but you know, at the moment I'm unable to do that. When it comes to your weapons, you definitely want strength, if possible, critical strike damage, and vulnerable damage. Those three stats will increase your damage the most. So try to get the strength on your two-handed weapons, because then you'll be able to get very high rolls of strength. Here you can see my other two-handed weapon. I have vulnerable damage, critical strike damage, and strength. The other affixes which can be good is damage against close enemies, basic skill damage if you wanna improve your frenzy damage against bleeding enemies. So it's very hard to get a good weapon, so try to at least get the 3 mandatory stats: strength, crit strike damage, and vulnerable damage. Here I'm using a very outdated weapon with quite low item power level. And I'm only using it basically as a stat stick, so to increase my stats. Next, let's move to the one-handed weapons. It's basically the same, but try to get as item with as high item power level as possible. Here you can see my stats are not ideal. I only have critical strike damage and strength. Damage against slower enemies and overpower damage are not really that good, but at least the weapon has high item power, so high base damage, so that's why I'm using it. And in my other weapon, I'm using Ramaldani's Magnum Opus, which is a quite good sword. It will increase the damage based on the available fury which you have. When we have in this case, if I would have 100 fury, this would give me a 30% damage multiplier. So very good sword. So that's one of the reasons why we are trying to stay at 100 fury as often as possible. Of course, finding those two unique items will not always be possible or easy, so you can definitely play without them. It really depends on what you're gonna find. You do not have to use swords. If you find a good pair of maces, that will also be wonderful. Maces, in theory, are either as good as swords or maybe even better, because they will stun your enemies additionally to all of the other sources of stun that we have. But thanks to Wallop, you'll be able to also increase your damage against stunned or vulnerable enemies. So that is very good. You can also take concussion to stun enemies even more. And the 100 mace expertise is very good. Increased damage against stunned enemies. So if you are able to find a good pair of maces, I think you should go for maces. I wasn't that lucky, but at least with swords. What I mean that I wasn't that lucky is that I did not find a pair of good maces. But I was quite lucky and got a nice pair of nice copy of Ramaldani's Magnum Opus. So yeah, that's it for the gear. And now let's move to the section with aspects, which is one of the most important sections in the guide. Okay, so let's start from the top. I'm using an aspect which gives me a chance to get 45 whenever I deal damage while berserking. It's a very high chance, 35% lucky hit chance, so it's quite high compared to some other aspects, and also quite substantial amount of 45. And we will be berserking most of the time, so that is why we are able to stay at 100% 45 most of the time. Next, we have, I believe it's called Disobedience. We get the more we attack, the more stacks we get, and the more stacks we have, the more armor multiplier we have. So try to get it somewhere on your gear. It was nerfed in the recent patch, but it's still very, very good. On your gloves, another lucky hit chance aspect. This time, whenever we hit a bleeding enemy, there's a chance to stun them. And we want to stun our enemies as often as possible, because then we'll deal increased damage to them, and I'll get to that part of the build in a second. So yeah, that's why we would like to stack some lucky hit chance on our gear, because this will rely on lucky hit chance, and the other aspect will also rely on lucky hit chance. On the pants, I have an aspect which gives me damage reduction after using basic skill. 20% in conjunction with the damage reduction we're getting from Frenzy. Very nice. On the boots, I'm using an aspect which gives me additional charge to my weapon mastery skills, so we're getting additional charge of Steel Grasp and additional charge of Death Blow. This way, we really do not have to worry about running out of charges of Steel Grasp. And also, in case you miss your Death Blow, or basically maybe you use it in a way which does not provide additional charge, you will still have an option to cast your Death Blow again. You may, not use this aspect here, but I really do not want to worry about those charges all the time, so that's why I want to incorporate this aspect into my build. In addition to that, this skill also gives your weapon mastery chance to stun your enemies, which is also very important to you, because in the higher Nightmare dungeons, most of your survivability comes from you being able to crowd control your enemies. So you have to have high damage in order to explode your enemies fast while they're under the effect of crowd control. Next, on our amulet, we do not have an aspect because we're using battle trance. On one of our rings, we use an aspect that whenever we deal damage while berserking, we inflict bleed to our enemies. So that is our source of bleed in the build. On the next ring, I have an aspect that increases my damage by a percentage amount up to 30% whenever we stand still. And we will stand still quite a lot of the time because we crowd control our enemies, we ground stomp, or when we fight bosses or elite enemies, we'll also stand still. So from here, we're able to quickly get up to 30% damage multiplier, so that is very nice. Now let's move to our two-handed weapons. Very important aspect here, which you should definitely put on a two-handed weapon because then it will be able to roll higher percentage amount. And on the first two-handed weapon, the legendary aspect we use is it will give us very high percent damage multiplier based on our available primary resource. So if we are at 100% or the 100 Fury, we'll be able to get a 38% damage multiplier, which is huge. And that's why I want to stay at 100% resource whenever possible, whenever we cast Death Blow and Double Swing, and it pairs really well with Ramaldani's Magnum Opus. On the other two-handed weapon, we have an aspect which gives us a chance to stun enemies, distant enemies when they hit you, which is not really that important, but it gives us a very big percent damage multiplier against stunned enemies. So that is why we have so many sources of stun in our build. Not only it helps us stay alive, but it also gives us a strong damage multiplier. And the last aspect on our 100 weapon is whenever we use basic skills, it will increase the damage of our next core skills by a percentage amount out of 30%. And that is why you see me weaving core skills, so core skill, in this case Double Swing, into my rotation. That is why I'm using 3 times Frenzy and then 1 time Double Swing, 3 times Frenzy, 1 time Double Swing, because I want to pump the damage from this aspect as much as possible. Of course, when you use Ground Stomp and you just want to go to town and detonate them with your spam Double Swings, you don't have to do that. But when you're fighting normal enemies, that's why I weave and try to use Double Swing every couple of casts of Frenzy. So yeah, that is the section with the legendary aspects. So as you can see, the goal of those aspects is to first give you Fortify, give you Berserking, and give you Bleed, so you can do other stuff and crowd control your enemies, and also give you percentage damage multipliers. So that is why I place those aspects in this way. Also, I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives if you do not want to use some of those aspects if you want to use some different skills. If you want to incorporate Iron Skin into your build, which is very good, you should definitely use this aspect. It will give your Iron Skin additional damage reduction and unstoppable. That is why I think that Iron Skin is actually better in this build compared to Challenging Shout. But as I said, I don't like that skill. I don't like Iron Skin for some reason. I don't like using that skill. And I like shouting at my enemies. So if you want to be optimal, you should probably use Challenging Shout in this aspect. Next is the Smithing offensive aspect. This might be a bit counterintuitive, and you might wonder why I may even consider using this aspect, because the additional critical hit chance against injured enemies is nice, but it will not blow you away, it will not increase your damage by a lot. However, what is very nice about this aspect that you will get increased crowd control duration. And if you put this on your two-handed weapon, it can go up to 80%. And you may think that's why would we need it? It's not like our ground stomp is in drastic, need of increasing duration. But what is very sneaky about this is actually that it has I think hidden synergy with Challenging Shout. And I did learn it from somebody else. I would love to give credit to them right now, but unfortunately I forgot their name. But the way it works, that whenever you use Challenging Shout, you will notice, like for example at the moment, you can see those letters Z, like my character is pretending to be asleep. But when you cast Challenging Shout above your enemies, you will see the place of that Z, you will see a floating skull above their heads. So as long as there is an enemy with a floating skull above them, your Challenging Shout will give you damage reduction, and it will also heal you if you choose to go for the right leader. If you put 3 points here, you will be able to heal 1% of your health per point, so up to 3% of your maximum health per second while you have a shout active. So your Challenging Shout can cast a ridiculous amount of time. As long as you do not kill that last enemy who has a skull above their heads, you will be able to heal yourself for 3% of your life per second, and also you will get the damage reduction. So that is very strong. So that is why you might consider using that aspect in your build. Next, the Earthquake aspect, which was buffed significantly in the recent patch. So now when you put it in your two-handed weapon, it can give you up to 50% damage multiplier, which is huge, which is really, really huge. So yeah, so you may want to use it on one of your two-handed weapons. Next, we have aspect of Encroaching Wrath. We are spending a lot of fury, so it's very easy to increase the damage of our weapon mastery skills to activate it. And if you put it on your two-handed weapon, you are able to get up to 200% damage multiplier on your death blow, which is huge. And if you pair it up with your mortal draw, glyph, your death blow can deal a really high amount of damage. I personally am not using it at the moment because Steel Grasp also counts as weapon mastery skill, so it could use that buff. But if you for some reason would not like to use Steel Grasp, then you may want to incorporate this aspect into your build, because then your death blow will be very, very, very good and will deal tons and tons of damage, right? And lastly, additionally, you can use the accelerating offensive aspect, which will increase your attack speed whenever your core skills crit. And we have quite high crit chance, and we use our core skills a lot, so this will give you a lot of attack speed, up to 50% if you put it on a two-handed weapon. So imagine that when you cast Ground Stomp and you crit at the very beginning, your barb just starts shredding everything. It's very enjoyable to watch. It's very enjoyable to play. So yeah, that's definitely a very valid option. So you can also use that. In the end, I'll say a couple of words about the gems. In your armor, preferably use Sapphires, because we have Fortify active most of the times. This will give you a lot of damage reduction, around 15%. If you want, you can go for Maximum Life or Topazes to increase the damage reduction while you're under the crowd control effect, but that's not recommended. I would either go for blue, for sapphires, or for red, for rubies, but preferably sapphires. If you're in World Tier 4 and you're able to comfortably be at 100% Fortify all the time. If you're at lower levels, go for rubies or topazes, because then you will most likely not be able to have that Fortify all the time. As for your weapons, I am using emeralds. This will increase your critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies and enemies under the vulnerable effect, basically 100% of the time, so this will be a nice damage boost. If you're in World Tier 3 or below, I would consider using flowered topazes, any sorts of topazes, because you will not be critting that much, and your friends will actually still be doing meaningful damage back then. Once your critical strike chance increases, and it's around 25 or 30%, then you can switch to emeralds in order to deal more critical strike damage. Now let us talk a little bit about the feature from the Season 1 of Diablo 4, and that is Malignant Hearts. Those are Malignant Hearts. Unfortunately, the Barbarian's Malignant Heart, the Wrathful Malignant Heart, which is the Cage Heart of Ignoring Pain, I'm not a huge fan of. It gives us a percentage chance to completely ignore the damage which we receive, which, you know, may be nice, but I'm not a fan of any sorts of defensive players which rely on chance. You know, I have terrible memories from Diablo 3 and playing a monk at the very beginning of the game, when the torment levels were actually hard. They were called torments? I don't remember how it was the last difficulty level called. Well, yeah, but basically, you know, the idea for the monk was that he should rely on, back then, on the on dodge chance, and in order to survive. And you know, it's fun when you're dodging a lot and the enemies do not hit you for a lot of damage, but it's not fun when they can one-shot you. So a layer of defense which gives you a chance not to die like 15% of the time, and then getting one-shotted by the remaining percentage of the time, I don't find that good. And besides, it's not like really it will help us that much, because as I said in the other portion of the video, in higher nightmare dungeons, you do not survive just by, you know, standing there and tanking hits. You have to actively either dodge or crowd control your enemies and then quickly kill them. That is how you survive in higher level of nightmare dungeons. As for the glyphs, which I find to be actually useful, is the Devious Heart, which is very good. The activation chance depends on whether or not you're attacking fast enough, and we are attacking very fast thanks to our frenzy and our frenzy stack, so you will be knocking down enemies all the time. It's really good glyph, and it activates very often. Yeah, so you know, sometimes I have problems. Before this, I used this glyph, I had problems with certain enemies, which would like those big crusaders, which would just crowd control you, or other enemies, which would be annoying. And this basically allows you to not knock them down, usually in 1 or 2 hits, as long as they are not magical. If they're elite or magical type of enemy, it has much lower chance of activating, or it doesn't activate at all, not sure. You know, because enemies are crowd controlled so much right now, but against regular enemies, it activates all the time. I really like it. Also, another heart is a Vicious Heart, which increases your critical strike damage. Basically, your non-crit damage is not that important because it's extremely low. So, you know, if they reduce that damage by 20%, like, who cares? It's already very, very low. On the other hand, your critical strike damage is that's where when the meat comes from. You know, that's where all the fun begins. So if you can increase that further, that's very good. So that's why I like this this heart. The next one is I'm just using it because I have nothing really else to put it here. It's the heart which reduces the resource draining effects, but I don't think it's working. I've seen zero difference, even though I have like 99% here, so this part of the heart is most likely not working. It also gives me a resource generation, which again we don't really need. So in a perfect scenario, what I would like to do is I would like to replace this with Barber. So, and also replace the knockdown heart with the blue heart, which would suppress 20% of incoming damage to increase our survivability a bit. But you know, I was unable to find anything with blue slot, so yeah. So in the future, when I'm done with climbing with this barbarian, I'll probably put a barber in here. At the moment, I don't want to do that. I want to see how high I can climb without it. So I just want to see how strong the build is, and then cheese everything with Barber, because Barber has a very high potential with this build. Because imagine this: you're still grasping enemies; they're all around your barbarian. Then you throw that juicy death blow on their heads. Then you also start casting double swings, and then all of that damage explodes. That's going to be simply glorious. Honestly, I think it would be good, but I don't know how I feel about the couple of seconds of immunity on enemies. I'm probably not going to be a big fan of that, but we'll see. Here I'll say a couple of words about the rotation. The rhythm and tempo and cadence of the build is great, and maybe this will show you why I like playing the build so much. First of all, you want to be at maximum fury all the time. because thanks to our items and legendary aspects, the more fury we have, the more damage we deal. So ideally, all of your death blows, all of your double swing should be cast whenever you have 100 fury or more, if you have more fury for gear. So basically, when your fury bar is full, that is when you want to cast your death blow, that's when you want to cast your double swing. So let's imagine we enter a room, we start a fight or whatever will in the open world, doesn't matter. You want to start a fight with a group of enemies, so you want to position your character in a way which will allow your chains to pull as many enemies as possible. These chains fan out in a kind of a very predictable way, so when you cast the ability, you know what's going to happen, so that's very nice. And after you cast the Steel Grass, the enemies are right in front of you. What you want to do next, you want to cast Death Blow. This way you will activate your Berserking buff, and this way you will explode and detonate most of the low health enemies. And in addition to that, you will most likely stun a lot of the enemies, thanks to our legendary aspects, which we have in our gear. And then after you've done those things, you want to start your basic rotation, which is basically 3 or 4 swings of Frenzy, followed by a swing of Double Swing. And why I do it this way? These swings of Frenzy allow me to stay at 100% Fury. They allow me to refresh the damage reduction buffs which I get from Frenzy. And also they allow me to stack damage amplification buff from legendary aspects. So this way we are maximizing the damage which our double swings are doing. When you're fighting elite enemies, or when you're in a pinch and you really want to detonate a lot of enemies really fast, you can just grab them, you can cast Death Blow. Then if they are not stunned, you can follow that up with Ground Stomp, and then just simply start spamming double swings. This is good, but you also have to remember that from time to time, if you're using Battle Trance, you should use at least one swing every couple of swings of double swing in order to have the attack speed buff from Battle Trance active. So when we are trying to destroy elite enemies and we can use Ground Stomp to do that, the cadence changes. We usually use three times double swing, and then we follow it up by one cast of Frenzy, and this way we're able to stay at full amount of stacks, and we're able to have damage from the Battle Trance active. And so our double swings will attack faster. Hopefully I was able to explain it good in a way that is at least semi clear to you. So yeah, so that's the end of this section. Let's move on. Okay, I think I mentioned everything. The build is a bit long, but you know, it is what it is. I tried to be as thorough as possible and to give you as much details as possible. Use it to your own advantage. Have fun with the build. Let me know how it works. Let me know if you would change anything. And yeah, thank you for watching, and have a good day and have fun playing your Barbarian in Diablo 4.